Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. The galaxy thought they were safe, until humanity's war fleet arrived. The Black Dagger fleet, the colony of Vesper 9, floated in the cold darkness of space, its metal cities gleaming under the distant sun. It had been a thriving outpost, a beacon of human progress in a hostile galaxy, but now its skies burned red. Explosions tore through the colony's defenses as alien warships hovered like hungry predators. The attack had come without warning. The Krail Dominion, a ruthless and war-hungry alien race, had struck fast and without mercy. Their massive ships, black and jagged like the teeth of a beast, loomed over the colony, unleashing a relentless barrage. Vesper 9's defense cannons fired desperately, but the Krail's energy shields absorbed the attacks like raindrops against a storm. Commander Alara Voss stood in the crumbling control center, gripping the edge of the strategy table. Her dark hair was matted with sweat, and blood dripped from a gash on her forehead. Around her, officers barked out damage reports, but the truth was clear. Vesper 9 was losing. "We've sent multiple distress signals," her communications officer, Lieutenant Jard Cole, said, his voice strained. "No response." Alara clenched her fists. "Try again." Jard hesitated. "Commander, the Galactic Council has declared us a lost cause. No one is coming." A heavy silence filled the room. Everyone knew what that meant. The Council had abandoned them. Vesper 9 was too far from the central systems, too unimportant to risk a full-scale war. The colonists were expendable. Outside, the last of the planetary shields flickered and died. The Krail fleet moved in, their troops preparing for planetary invasion. If they landed, it wouldn't just be war, it would be slaughter. Alara refused to accept it. Her mind raced. There had to be something, anything. Then she remembered a desperate option. She turned to a hidden console at the edge of the room. Dust covered its surface. It hadn't been used in centuries. It was an emergency beacon, a distress signal so ancient, so classified that only the highest-ranking officers even knew it existed. Legends whispered that this beacon was linked to a force beyond anything the galaxy had seen, a force that had been sleeping for centuries, a force that was only meant to awaken when humanity had nothing left. Alara hesitated for only a second, then with a deep breath, she activated the beacon. Far across the galaxy, deep in the Sol system, something stirred. Deep in the vast emptiness of space, where even the light of distant stars struggled to reach, an ancient network of hidden satellites, forgotten by most and feared by those who still remembered their purpose, suddenly activated as the Omega beacon signal pulsed outward like a ripple through the endless void, carrying with it a message that had not been spoken in centuries, a call for Earth's most feared and secretive fleet to awaken. Buried beneath the frozen surface of Titan, Saturn's largest moon, a colossal warship that had been dormant for generations shuddered to life, its dark metal hull trembling as ancient systems rebooted. Engines hummed, and deep within its command core, a single red light flickered, an alert that had only one meaning. Humanity was in danger, and there would be no negotiations, no diplomacy, only war. Admiral Elias Kane, a man whose name had become more myth than reality, opened his eyes inside his command pod, his body suspended in a cryostate that had preserved him for this very moment, his mind sharpening like a blade as the ship's AI fed him the situation. The colony of Vesper 9 was under attack. The Galactic Council had refused to intervene, and the enemy had made a fatal mistake. They believed no one would come. Across the system, more warships stirred, their dark forms emerging from the icy depths of hidden bases, their weapons slowly coming online, their engines roaring to life as they answered the Omega call. For this was not just any fleet. It was the Black Dagger fleet, Earth's most classified and feared military force, created for one purpose alone: to strike with absolute force when humanity was left with no other option, to remind the galaxy that even in its darkest hour, Earth would never surrender. As Admiral Kane stepped onto the bridge of his flagship, the ISV Revenant, a monstrous dreadnought armed with weapons that had never before been unleashed in open battle, he cast his gaze upon the tactical displays showing the colony's desperate struggle, the fleet's current positions, and the projected time until arrival, his jaw tightening as he saw the brutality of the Krail Dominion. their warships tearing through the last of the colony's defenses, their invasion forces preparing to land. Their arrogance blinding them to the storm that was about to descend upon them. With a voice as cold as the void itself, Cain gave the order that would mark the beginning of the end for the invaders, his words simple yet carrying the weight of humanity's fury. All ships engage warp drives. We move now. And with that, space itself seemed to fold as the fleet surged forward, moving faster than any enemy could anticipate, closing the vast distance between Earth and the battlefront in mere moments. An unstoppable force racing toward a fight that would change the balance of power forever. Because the Krail had made one unforgivable mistake. They had underestimated humanity's wrath, and now they would learn why the Black Dagger fleet was feared across the stars. The Krail Dominion's warships continued their relentless assault on Vesper 9, their massive cannons unleashing firepower that reduced towering structures to rubble, their invasion transports descending like a swarm of locusts upon the colony's surface, and their commanders watching with smug satisfaction as the final defenses of the human settlement crumbled, convinced that victory was now inevitable, that the weak and desperate colonists would either surrender or perish, and that no force in the galaxy would dare intervene against their overwhelming might. On the surface, chaos reigned as fire and smoke filled the skies, the streets choked with panicked civilians running for shelter that no longer existed, soldiers fighting a losing battle against an enemy that seemed unstoppable, and Commander Alara gripping her rifle with white-knuckled intensity as she led her remaining troops in a desperate last stand, her mind screaming at the injustice of it all. The Galactic Council had abandoned them. The distress calls had gone unanswered, and now the people of Vesper 9 were left to die alone, facing an enemy that showed no mercy, an enemy that slaughtered without hesitation, an enemy that saw humans as nothing more than insects to be crushed beneath their armored boots. And yet, even as the Krail warriors advanced through the ruined streets, their weapons cutting down anything that moved, even as Alara's forces dwindled to a handful of desperate fighters clinging to the last fortified stronghold, even as the colony's command center was breached and the enemy's flag was raised above its shattered walls, something changed, something so small at first that none of the invaders noticed. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sudden interference in their communications, a faint tremor that ran through the ground, growing stronger with each passing second, until finally, a sound shattered the silence that had hung over the battlefield, a sound so deep, so unnatural that it sent a ripple of fear through every Krail soldier who heard it, a sonic boom that did not belong to any ship they recognized. Then, before any of them could react, before their commanders could issue a single order, before their warships could raise their shields, the sky above Vesper 9 was torn apart as the first of the Black Dagger fleet warships emerged from warp, their dark hulls blotting out the stars, their engines burning with a fury that had not been seen in centuries, their weapons charging with an intensity that sent shock waves through the very fabric of space. And for the first time since the invasion began, the Krail forces, who had believed themselves to be the apex predators of this galaxy, felt something they had never felt before, pure, unrelenting terror. The ISV Revenant, the flagship of the fleet, was the first to make its presence known, its monstrous silhouette dwarfing even the largest of the Krail warships, its hull plated with an alloy so advanced that no weapon had ever breached it, its cannons bristling with experimental technology that had remained hidden from the galaxy for centuries. And at its helm stood Admiral Elias Kane, his expression as cold as the void itself, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade as he issued the command that would turn this battlefield into a graveyard. All ships, fire at will. And in that moment, the heavens themselves erupted as beams of energy, missiles the size of buildings, and kinetic projectiles traveling at near-light speeds rained down upon the enemy fleet, their shields collapsing instantly, their hulls shattering like glass, their commanders screaming in confusion and panic as ship after ship was obliterated in the blink of an eye. Because they had been prepared for resistance, they had been prepared for a prolonged siege, they had even been prepared for planetary reinforcements, but they had never been prepared for this. On the ground, the Krail troops who had once marched forward with unshakable confidence now stumbled and fell, their weapons trembling in their hands as explosions ripped through their ranks, their leaders desperately barking orders that no one could follow, their escape ships being sniped out of the sky before they could even lift off. And in that moment, as the invaders realized they were not the hunters but the hunted, Commander Alara raised her weapon once more, a grin forming on her bloodied lips, because she knew humanity had come and the slaughter had only just begun. The battlefield had transformed in an instant. One moment, the Krail Dominion stood as the undisputed conquerors of Vesper 9, their warships looming over the colony like executioners poised to deliver the final blow, their ground forces sweeping through the streets with mechanical efficiency, their commanders convinced that victory was already secured. The next moment, their fleet was in ruins, their forces scattered, and the cold grip of death was closing around them. The Black Dagger fleet did not hesitate. They did not pause to issue warnings. They did not waste words on diplomacy. They came for war, and war was all they brought. The ISV Revenant, leading the charge, moved like a reaper through the void, its weapons firing with unrelenting precision, its shields absorbing enemy fire as if it were nothing more than dust in the wind. The once-proud Krail Armada, a fleet that had conquered countless worlds, had no defense against the onslaught. Their hulls were pierced like paper, their energy barriers torn apart before they could fully deploy, their escape routes cut off before they even realized they needed them. On the ground, the chaos had turned into sheer carnage. The Krail soldiers who had, minutes ago, laughed as they gunned down human resistance fighters were now running, not as warriors in retreat, but as prey being hunted. The sonic booms of drop pods filled the sky as elite shock troopers descended from the heavens, their armor gleaming black against the burning red of the battlefield, their weapons calibrated for maximum lethality. They did not fire warning shots. They did not take prisoners. They moved through the enemy ranks like wraiths, their rifles barking death, their blades cutting through armor as though it were soft flesh. And wherever they passed, the Krail fell. Commander Alara, bloodied but unbroken, pushed herself up from the debris where she had taken cover, her heart pounding as she took in the sight before her. For hours, she had fought, believing that this was the end, that Vesper 9 would become nothing more than another colony wiped from the stars, that her people would be just another tragic story in the long history of wars lost. And yet, in the span of mere moments, the tide had turned so completely that even her war-hardened mind struggled to process it. She had heard stories of the Black Dagger fleet everyone had, a force so secretive, so untouchable that even the Galactic Council spoke of them only in hushed tones. No one knew where they were stationed. No one knew how many ships they had. No one even knew who commanded them. All that was known was one simple truth. When they arrived, the war was already over. The Krail, however, had never believed in myths, and now they were paying the price for their ignorance. A distant explosion rocked the landscape as another Krail warship was ripped apart in orbit, its burning wreckage crashing down into the outskirts of the colony, sending plumes of fire and smoke into the air. The few remaining enemy fighters scrambled to regroup, but it was useless. Every signal they sent was jammed. Every formation they attempted was crushed. Every last hope of survival was systematically erased. Alara staggered forward, gripping her rifle as she watched her enemies fall apart. The Krail officers, once so smug and untouchable, were screaming into their broken communicators, their troops abandoning their positions, their reinforcements obliterated before they could even land. And then, for the first time since the battle had begun, a voice echoed through the war-torn streets. A voice transmitted directly from the ISV Revenant, calm, collected, and colder than deep space itself. Krail forces, you invaded a human world. You killed human civilians. You gave no mercy. You will receive none. Alara inhaled sharply, recognizing the voice before the name was even spoken. Admiral Elias Kane. The Krail had sealed their fate the moment they attacked a world under humanity's protection, and now they were about to learn why the Black Dagger fleet was the most feared force in the galaxy. The battlefield was no longer a war zone. It was a slaughterhouse. The Krail, once arrogant and ruthless, were now scrambling, their forces broken, their fleet crumbling under the merciless assault of the Black Dagger fleet. Admiral Elias Kane stood on the command bridge of the ISV Revenant, his piercing gaze locked on the tactical display. The Krail fleet, once a formidable wall of warships, was now a graveyard of burning wrecks. Every time they tried to regroup, the Black Daggers struck faster than they could react. Every escape route was cut off. Every distress signal jammed. There was no retreat. "Sir," one of the officers reported, "Krail command vessel is attempting a final push. Scans show they're overloading their core. They're going to ram the colony." A desperate act, a final spiteful move to ensure that if they lost, so would humanity. Kane exhaled slowly, his voice steady, unwavering. "Target their engines, then their bridge. Do not let them move another meter." The order was followed before his words even finished leaving his mouth. The ISV Revenant and its escort ships fired in perfect sync, their weapons punching through Krail armor like it was paper. The enemy command vessel, a behemoth of destruction, shuddered violently as its engines were ripped apart, its forward momentum instantly killed. It lurched in space, adrift, powerless. A second volley followed immediately after. The bridge of the Krail flagship detonated in a violent fireball, sending debris scattering across the void. The mighty warship, once the symbol of Krail dominance, now drifted lifelessly, its fate sealed. On the ground, the situation was even more brutal. The Krail soldiers, once ruthless conquerors, were now nothing more than prey. Humanity's elite ground forces had landed in full strength, their exosuits gleaming black, their weapons humming with lethal precision. They moved through the streets like specters of vengeance, cutting through enemy forces with terrifying efficiency. Krail officers begged for orders from their high command. None came. Their commanders were either dead or fleeing, their ships in ruins, their empire's arrogance turned into desperation. Commander Alara Voss, her uniform torn and stained with battle, pressed forward with her remaining forces, watching as the Black Dagger troops unleashed hell upon their enemies. They fought without hesitation, without mercy. Every shot they fired dropped a Krail where they stood. Every blade strike ended a life. The Krail, for the first time in their existence, felt true fear. A transmission came through her comms, audio only. "Commander Voss." Admiral Kane's voice, calm and absolute. "Your people fought well. This battle is over." Relief washed over her. The fight had felt unwinnable, and yet now Vesper 9 was free. But the war was not over because the Black Dagger fleet did not just come for revenge. They came to send a message, and the rest of the galaxy was about to hear it loud and clear. The war was over on Vesper 9, but the echoes of battle still lingered in the air, thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone. The once pristine colony, a symbol of human resilience, now bore the scars of war, craters where buildings once stood, streets littered with the wreckage of Krail war machines, the silence of a battlefield where only one side remained standing. The Black Dagger fleet had not just won, they had dominated. Admiral Elias Kane surveyed the wreckage from the command deck of the ISV Revenant, his expression unreadable. Below him, thousands of Krail bodies lay motionless, their once feared forces now reduced to nothing more than remnants of arrogance and overconfidence. Their ships, once symbols of Krail power, now floated lifeless in the void, their hulks stripped of function, a grim warning to any who might challenge Earth. The surviving Krail troops, those who had surrendered instead of dying in futile resistance, knelt in the dirt under the watchful eyes of heavily armed Black Dagger soldiers. Their weapons had been taken, their pride shattered. Some shivered, others sat in silent despair. They had never expected this. They had always believed humans were weak, scattered, nothing more than a fledgling species playing at war. But now they knew the truth. Humanity had watched, prepared, and waited, and when the time came, they struck with a force the galaxy had never seen before. Kane's comms flared to life, a priority transmission. "Sir," came the voice of Lieutenant Rail, his tone laced with urgency, "we intercepted a Krail transmission. High Command has declared the loss of Vesper 9 an act of war. They're rallying their fleets. They're coming." Kane didn't flinch. He had expected nothing less. The Krail would not take this humiliation in silence. Their entire empire was built on dominance, fear, and the illusion of invincibility. That illusion had been shattered today, and now they would try to restore it the only way they knew how, with overwhelming force. How many? Kane asked, his voice calm. At least 4 battle groups, sir. More could follow. Our intelligence suggests they will retaliate at full strength. Silence hung in the air for a moment before Kane finally responded. Good, he said simply. The bridge crew exchanged glances. They knew what was coming, and yet not a single one hesitated. They had trained for this. They had waited for this. The Black Dagger fleet was ready. Prepare all forces for immediate redeployment, Kane ordered, his voice sharp as steel. We're not waiting for them to come to us. Lieutenant Rail hesitated. Sir, are you suggesting we take the fight to them? Kane turned, his piercing gaze sweeping over the crew. The Krail believe they can crush us with numbers. They believe we'll cower and retreat. They are wrong. We're going to do what humanity does best. A pause, then he spoke the words that would mark the beginning of a war the galaxy would never forget. We hit them first. Across the fleet, orders were relayed. Engines flared to life. Weapons systems hummed, locking in targets across the void. The Black Daggers were not done. Vesper 9 had been a message. Now it was time to deliver it in person. The Krail thought they had seen the full might of humanity. They had no idea what was coming next. The Black Dagger fleet had vanished from Vesper 9's orbit, not because they retreated, but because they had already set their next target. The Krail, confident in their swift retaliation, had begun rallying their fleets in the Ballur system, a heavily fortified staging ground at the edge of their empire. They expected a drawn-out war. They expected humanity to defend, to react. What they didn't expect was a preemptive strike. From the darkness of space, the Black Dagger fleet emerged like wraiths. They came without warning, their ships silent and cold, reflecting no signals, no energy emissions, not until it was too late. The ISV Revenant led the charge, its massive frame sleek and black against the void, cut through the enemy formation like a predator among prey. The Krail's warships, though numerous, were unprepared. Their engines were cold, their crews scrambling as alarms blared through their halls. Admiral Kane sat in the command chair, his expression unreadable. All ships, he said into the comm, engage at will. Hellfire was unleashed. Missiles screamed through the void, leaving bright trails of death as they tore through Krail hulls like paper. Energy beams lanced out in perfect synchronization, piercing the Krail's shields, melting through their armor. The Krail's once mighty warships, so used to dictating the flow of battle, were now trapped in their own graveyard. Aboard the Krail command station, High Lord Vorik watched in disbelief. Impossible, he snarled, his claws digging into the metal railing. They should not be here, they should be on the defensive. A nearby officer stammered, his mandibles clicking in fear. Sir, their ships, they are too fast, too precise. We can't react in time. Vorik's blood burned with rage. For centuries, the Krail had been the apex of war. They had crushed empires, enslaved civilizations. No one had ever dared bring the fight to them, until now. All ships counterattack, Vorik bellowed. Surround them, overwhelm them. But it was already too late. Human ships weaved through the chaos like specters, their movements unpredictable, their weapons brutally efficient. They did not engage in prolonged battles. They struck. They killed. They moved. The Black Daggers did not fight fair. The Krail's flagship, Servivas, took a direct hit to its reactor core. A massive explosion ripped it apart, sending molten debris scattering in every direction. Panic spread through the Krail ranks. They had always fought species that begged for mercy, that crumbled at the sight of superior force. But humanity was something else entirely. On board the ISV Revenant, Kane watched as the Krail fleet began to break. Some ships tried to retreat, others fought with desperation, but there was no victory left to seize. This is what happens when you think you're untouchable, Kane murmured. Then a transmission came through. The Krail's High Lord, his face twisted in fury, his voice trembling with something that might have been fear. This isn't over, human, Vorik growled. You think you've won, you have only invited destruction upon your kind. Kane leaned forward, his voice cold. No, we didn't invite anything, we're delivering it. He cut the transmission. The battle was over in minutes. The Krail's mighty fleet was no more. The staging ground at Ballur was in flames, and humanity had just rewritten the rules of war. For the first time in galactic history, the Krail were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted.